Ciao, hey everybody, welcome back to Corey Wire Art. I'm Corey, and we're going to be looking at finishing off a few more details on this sketch I've done of this lady. Yeah, so let's get right into it. Okay, so basically what we've got here is we've got the basic sketch, and we've got a little bit of shading, a little bit of rendering, a bit of 3D topography, all that sort of stuff. That's metal. That's why, because fundamentally Corey's metal, right? But getting away from the point here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at some key details of the face now, and how I like to render them quickly and easily, without too much detail, to give, almost a finished sort of polished product. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take this sketch layer right now, and I am going to just drop it down. I normally wouldn't do this, but I might just merge it with the shading layer, just so that I can work a little bit of the colors around and stuff like that. I like to use a lot of sort of blending and things like that. Again, a lot of this is not going to translate perfectly to whatever medium you're using, but at the same time, it's not going to be too far off either. There's always some way around it, some way to sort of figure it out. If you're using chalk pastels or if you're using colored pencils, you might want to think about some things before you dive right in. Plan where you're going to put highlights and things like that. But the fundamentals are the same, and if you practice a little bit like this, you're going to end up with something that, a way to do it for you, basically. So, all right, so let's have a look at the eye first. Let's jump right in here. Okay, so where are we going to start? I think what we'll do is, I don't mind the layout too much of that. I'm just going to grab a blender and just sort of smoke in these sort of lines a little bit. And already they're starting to look like, creases and stuff like that, as opposed to, like pencil lines and stuff like that. So you want to, again, remember your shading rules. So the bottom of the eye, the top eyelid, is going to be dark, and I'm just going to just smudge this in a little bit. Like that. Now, there's some things to know about the eye that make things a lot more easy to sort of figure out. Generally, what will happen is when you look at the iris, if you're going to sort of shade it, because it's kind of like it's like a concave sort of a shape. So the top half of it is where you're going to find a little bit more shadow up here. And then you're going to have more of a highlight down the bottom. It's still going to all be the same color, and generally it works a little bit better if you have almost like a darker sort of solid outline around there to hold everything together. Now I'm drawing this overly large in this case, but you get the idea. So let's bring this shadow line in under here, and it's always a good idea to add this little guy in down there at this point. And the shape of the bottom of the eye tends to be like a shallower curve sort of across this part, which sort of opens up a little bit and then curves back around there. So you sort of have this weird sort of almost like a really flat sort of S shape. You can sort of see as I come up to the bottom of the eye there. Let me just blend that out a little bit. You can see it a little bit better like that. Like it's almost like this part here where the shading is. If you imagine like under the eyeball here, it sort of pushes that little bottom of the lid up a little bit. And oh, sorry about that. And again, we're going to follow the contour up here of that eyeball that we had originally drawn in there. Let's just render this out a little bit. Boom, boom, boom. And then, the pupil, again, is very important. So that's, if you're ever going to use any kind of a black in your portraits, then the two places I would generally use it is the pupil. And you want to make sure the pupil's right dead center of this sort of the iris, otherwise it always looks a bit weird. It might be a little bit out, but we'll go with that. And maybe just like a smidge of the nostril, depending on how much of the nostril you can see. A lot of times it's just a darker flesh tone if you really look at photographs and stuff like that. So yeah, let's use this darker color to just rough in a little bit more of this shadow line under the eyelid. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. Now the key that sells the eye, actually, you know what, before I do that, let me just I feel like I need a little bit more shadow contouring around this part here. So you want to go around the eyeball on this side and maybe a little under there, just a hint, otherwise the subject looks a bit tired. And you want to go across here. Now for feminine characters, you can take your cues from makeup, and I often do that when I'm doing this sort of stuff. Is I'll take a darker color and do an eyeline. It depends. If you want something to look classic, you would generally stay away from makeup and try and make the face look as natural as possible. But if you're doing, a figure that you want to look really modern, a female figure, then you'll want to sort of like, smear in a bit of eyeliner here. And you want to concentrate and focus all the darker sort of things to the outer edge of the eye. And then let's just add in a little bit of, I guess, eyeshadow, which would sort of bring it up around here. Never really put too much under the eye. It's just always more shading down there, but that sort of thing. It looks a little bit more exotic. And while we're at it, let's darken the top half of this a little bit here. I feel like that wasn't quite enough. And then we go back over and fix up that pupil. Okay, yeah, now getting back to it, the part I was saying before about really selling the natural look of the eye is your specular highlights. I was just talking about earlier. So we get an actual white, right? And a fine sort of pencil. And it depends on the environment. If the subject's in a studio, often you'll see the studio lighting reflected in the eye. That's where you get that ring light effect around people's pupils in R&B videos and stuff like that. In nature, often it's a landscape or something reflected back. You got to think of it like a mirror, like a round, like a spherical mirror. But, I often find just a little, just put a dot somewhere to make a start, and you can add a little bit of like inflections and things like that around that sort of just give it a little hint of, it takes away that symmetry, that you don't want to be just perfect little dots. Although even in life, sometimes they are, but this gives a little bit more character, if anything. And sometimes I like to add a little bit of a specular highlight down here as well. Just opens that part of the inner eye up a little bit. Now, the other thing I've noticed about eyes is often you'll get, let's see, if I choose a color, let's choose this light color here. Often you'll get a little bit on the bottom eyelid here. There'll always be a little bit of a highlight that runs around, because the inside of your eyelids are kind of like, it's like a beveled surface. It's like it's not curved. It sort of flattens along the edge of the rim of the eye there. So if you put a little bit of a ledge there, it just picks up a little bit of that light from up here, coming down. And there you go. And I mean, you can use your little highlights to sort of bring out, along the edges of shadows and things like that. If it's too much, you can sort of smudge it in a little bit. And yeah, so I mean, that's a pretty good eye. Now lashes, you're going to want to find a line, and again, if you want it natural, I'd use lighter colors and stuff, but if you want it to look a little bit made up, then use like a darker, a charcoaly sort of tone. Try not to use too much black, because it takes away from the impact of the pupil. But you want your lashes, I always start from the outside line here, and I always bring it around to follow this little contour of like the brow line. And it never starts right in here. It's always just a smidgen out from this bottom lid line. And you just flick it out. And the other thing about lashes too, I could actually be a little bit darker, is they often, they clump into pairs. So you sort of draw like, two together. Get a little bit of a triangular apex sort of thing going there. And, I always soften them out as I get towards the top of the eye there. And it's okay if the lash sort of comes down over like the white part, the spherical part of the ear, and pops back out. That's actually okay too. It's again, it's got a lot to do with makeup. It's more makeup than it is realism. But then, once I've sort of put them in, I'll put in some key lines. And we're back. Sorry about that. I just got a phone call. I use my iPhone as a webcam, and I got a phone call, so that would have been pretty jarring. Okay, so Where was I? Okay, so yeah, we're just sort of touching up these eyelashes here. You know, now the other thing is too. I mean, you want to not be too weird, and you got to have some eyelashes around there. Okay, so the other thing to remember here is you got your little bottom lashes, and they come out from that little highlight we mentioned earlier. And again, they're usually in little clumps of 2. Simple. Okay. So that's the eye. And again, you know, like I'm working grayscale here, so that adds an element of sort of like an artificial sort of element to it. But if I was to sort of pick like a, you know, some sort of a hue, and just even just put a little hint of color in there, you can see how it's got it. You know, I mean, this is more illustrative than it is realistic. But you know, and then you can sort of, if you really want to get detailed, you can put in these little, you know, striations in here, and I would always just take the color out to that outer dark line, you know, that sort of thing. But see, I mean, there's a little bit of depth there and stuff like that. Like it's far from perfect, but it's good, you know, to illustrate, you know, the different things that I've been talking about. So yeah, so there you go. That's how I would draw an eye. And we'll come back and we'll look at a nose, maybe some lips, and you know, a few other features. And yeah, so go practice that, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.